Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us straight out of the Judge Vault. In fact, it's been a key question ever since Cavern of Souls was printed, and recently took on new significance with the printing of Delighted Halfling, which has a similar ruling with the same answer. Amy controls Cavern of Souls, for which the named type is Bear. She taps this land and a forest to play a Grizzly Bears. Nick responds by playing a counterspell against the Grizzly Bears. Amy says her spell isn't countered because she used mana from Cavern of Souls. Nick replies that she didn't say it was uncounterable, so therefore he should be able to counter it. The players then call for a judge. How do you rule? Okay, so before we start, I want to point out that there is nothing illegal about playing a counterspell targeting an uncounterable spell. The counterspell won't do anything when it resolves, but that doesn't mean that it was against the rules to play that counterspell. Just like how you can play a Wrath even if there are no creatures to destroy. With that said, the core point in question here is who's responsible for remembering, or at least pointing out, that Cavern of Souls makes things uncounterable. This question is a pretty tricky one from a philosophy standpoint because there are two competing principles at play here. On the one hand, if someone is making a play that could lead to an ambiguous game state, such as tapping lands in such a way that their spell may or may not be counterable, we typically expect that the person making the play is responsible for clearing up that ambiguity. Some situations are so common that there is an official tournament shortcut that specifies a default, which players and judges can use when there's doubt as to what the correct game state should be. But a quick glance through that section of the MTR shows that none of those are relevant to the situation described in the original problem statement. On the other hand, we also have what I like to call the players have a brain principle, which states that if we have a choice between two different interpretations of a player's actions, and one of them requires that the player would have made some sort of clearly illogical or unreasonable decision, then we should favor the other one. There's basically no logical reason why someone would choose to activate the colorless ability of the Cavern of Souls if they had a choice between that and activating the other ability. And I'm sure there's already some people who are starting to type some comments about how, what if you're trying to use the Grizzly Bears as a bait spell and you have a summoning trap? Because those are the exact same comments that were brought up about a decade ago when this policy was being originally fleshed out. Remember that policy is written for the average case, not the corner case. And I think we can all agree that if we looked at 1,000 random instances where a player could use Cavern of Souls to make their creature uncounterable or not, the outcome of the vast majority of those would be the same. The fact that there may exist some conceivable set of circumstances where the outcome is different doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't set the default in such a way that works most of the time and requires the exceptional cases to have exceptional handling. So which of these two principles wins out in the case described in the original problem statement? And it turns out the answer is that even without any communication from Amy, her creature is assumed to be uncounterable. This is the answer regardless of the rules enforcement level at the event. The policy writer cited developer intent as one of the major drivers for the final decision, saying that Wizards intended to make this card so that your spells would be uncounterable whether you said so or not. That may be the case, but I think that practical considerations are important here too. Trying to get people to specifically say that they're using Cavern every single time just isn't a fun play pattern, and it doesn't correspond to what most people do when they use this card either. Now, this is the point where I would normally show a passage from the official policy documents on screen that backs up the ruling, but unfortunately I can't do that. This ruling actually isn't anywhere to be found in these documents. It only exists on some other official online sources, such as the Magic Judge blog and Magic Judge Twitter. I'll leave some links in the description if you'd like to check those. So I guess the only other thing to answer is the obvious question of what you should do when Nick inevitably says, well, okay, so I didn't know it couldn't be countered, can I take back the counterspell? And this question has a lot of the same issues that the other one did. Should we value Nick knowing what's going on more, or Amy communicating clearly more? Unfortunately, unlike the previous question, there isn't a single unambiguous official correct answer to this case. The answer you get for this question is going to depend on the individual circumstances surrounding the ruling as it happens, and perhaps some amount of your judge's personal opinions on how much weight each side's respective concerns should hold. That said, I feel like a clickbaiter if I don't at least say what I think I would do in this sort of case, so if this was my tournament without any other information surrounding the context of this call, I would fall on the side of Nick being able to take back the counterspell. I don't want to encourage Nick to play sloppily and not pay attention to what's going on in his game, but I place more value on not encouraging Amy to try to put her Cavern of Souls at the bottom of a stack of other lands to try to trick her opponent into misplaying. The other point in Nick's favor is that I can understand holding players to a ruling that's spelled out in the official policy documents, but expecting them to be familiar with a 5-year-old article or a 10-year-old tweet is a bit more of a stretch, especially because this ruling has actually changed once in Magic's history. Once again, this opinion is more of a starting point than a ruling, and communication that happened in the match, both verbal and nonverbal, might sway the ruling in either player's favor. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.